This week on Quality Digest Live, new methods to overcome manufacturing nonconformities.
Plus, how can you manage risk and suppliers at the same time? Well, we'll find out when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
And welcome back to Quality Digest Live for April 22nd, 2016. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
Yes, he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. We start the show this week with a recent announcement from Gartner that we linked out to in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. The piece concerns a particularly timely and interesting event, Gartner's Security and Risk Management Summit, which occurs from June 13th to June 16th in National Harbor, Maryland. And National Harbor, Maryland, as you know, Dirk, it's right outside of Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes, I knew that. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful part of the country right out there in Maryland. Now, of course, risk management is increasingly of concern to anyone and everyone in industry. All of us in the quality profession have needed to pay much closer attention to this discipline since language regarding risk-based thinking was introduced in the 2015 version of ISO 9001, which was published last fall. Now, later in the show, today we're going to be talking with Tim Lozier of ETQ about risk mitigation as it applies to supplier relations. So this is, as you can see, something that we have been and will continue to cover thoroughly here in Quality Digest Daily and on Quality Digest Live. Gartner Summit, I think, is interesting for a couple of reasons. First, the Gartner organization is recognized as one of the world's leading information technology research organizations. The company is partnered to more than 10,000 clients across the globe, and they have more than 1,700 researchers gathering and interpreting data for them. So these guys know their stuff. I mean, Gartner, of course, is a well-known company. There's a lot of data coming in, a lot of very high-profile people work for Gartner, and they draw information from a lot of different sources around the world. So they know what they're talking about when they're talking about risk management, this type of a summit. Now, second, the summit this June, I was reviewing it the other day online, has really great tracks, including those on information management security, business continuity management, and risk and compliance, all things that I think are of interest to all of us here, of interest certainly to many of you out there. Yeah, no doubt about it. Third and finally, I think there's great speakers scheduled, including one of my personal favorites, former General Colin Powell. He was he's still a general, I guess, but he's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the United States Secretary of State, a great statesman, of course, there. And he's going to talk really about security as it relates to risk and information security.
If only he would run for president.
Yeah, right. No doubt about it. So for more information on Gartner's Security and Risk Management Summit, be sure to check out the story link just below this video player page, which is, of course, right down there. In fact, as always, all the stories that Dirk and I are going to be covering on today's show are available right down there for your reading and viewing pleasure. So check that out and check out that summit. It looks like a good one, I think, coming up in a couple of months in June, right outside of Washington, D.C. So if you're interested in risk and security, information security, make sure you check that one out.
Colin Powell was like 2 presidential elections ago, people wanted him to run, and he basically went, "No, I don't think so."
Yeah, I think 2008.
Yeah,
he was considered.
And people were going, that'd be awesome, because, and he went, no.
No, yeah.
no.
Yeah,
I'm smarter than that.
Yeah, well, he had served in an administration with Bush before that, and said, "I've seen this on the inside." Thank you, but no.
I've seen the slummy being made.
That's
okay.
Right.
Well, this next story might sound a little naive coming from me, because I'm not an expert on Kanban, but I thought this story was interesting because when I think of Kanban, I immediately think of an inventory pull system. And I know Kanban is used, Kanban just means, I think, visualization or visualize. And I understand it's used in a lot of ways, but in my experience in manufacturing, Kanban was an inventory pull system, little cardboard cards in the production line, for instance, that indicate that a part needs to be replenished. So I came across, for me, a different take on Kanban in an article by Amy Williams, The Power of C.P.R. And the article mainly deals with how a company responds to nonconformities. And Williams refers to a systematic approach to dealing with nonconformities that she refers to as CPR. So the first one, C, identify and address specific cultural challenges facing the organization. The second one, P, outline the advantages of predictability. And finally, R, how you can use innovation to redefine a non-conforming product. And it's an interesting article just kind of delving into those three things. And I encourage you to read it. But what I want to talk about is a little nugget contained in a case study from Williams Company, which is Alliance Rubber, one of the nation's largest rubber band manufacturers. And the case study involves the P, or predictability element of CPR. And specifically, Williams discusses how Kanban can increase predictability and reduce the number of variables in the process. And she had mentioned that in the original draft of the article, and I went back and I went, okay, I'm not all that familiar with Kanban, so how does it reduce the number of variables? And she said, well, it's like this. She says, let's look at our case, in Alliance's case. They used, first of all, a visualization board to identify the work within each of their processes. And when they did that, they detected a bottleneck. And the bottleneck was that the packaging area wasn't able to consistently support customer demand or delivery times because there was too much work in process. And in other words, they were building excess inventory and couldn't support their build rate. And what they had wasn't a demand-driven build rate, and that was kind of the key takeaway. And what Williams wrote to me was that this can be costly because when an organization issues work that can't be completed, the department has to shift their priorities and change schedules, which results in increased costs and associated with setup. And every time, this is the key bit, every time you create a change or new setup, you introduce variables into the process and you set yourself up for nonconformities, because every time you have a variable, there's something that can go wrong with that variable. The variable may do something you don't expect. So you want to have the fewest number of variables possible in your process. And you don't want to keep introducing new variables and changing variables, because anytime you do that, something can go wrong. So what they did is, using a Kanban system, Alliance was able to limit work in process by only issuing work in process for current demand. In other words, they're not building excess inventory. So in Kanban terms, you can think of this as controlled inventory of work in process. So what this did is this improved their setup times, improved their cycle times, reduced their excess inventory, and in addition, they were able to use a Kanban system with their suppliers, because now they had consistent predictability and usage, which in turn lessened the amount of external excess inventory. And so like I said, I liked this example. At least for me, I often think of building excess inventory as maybe a storage issue. Now you got to have a place to put all this this inventory. You got to do something with it. Sometimes it's an accounting issue. In fact, I think we talked about inventory accounting. How do you deal with inventory that hasn't been sold? And how So there's kind of issues associated. And that's kind of, when I think of it, excess inventory, that's what I think of. But her point is that if you're trying to build faster than your process will allow, and it isn't to customer demand, then why are you doing it? Is there really a reason to build excess inventory? And you should at least question it.
Yeah.
Is there really a reason why we're doing that? Now, there can be legitimate reasons. You may, maybe prior to a Christmas rush, you might have to build excess inventory in order to prepare for excess shipments that you're going to have to do in order to supply your retailers with more product than they would normally carry. I mean, so there might be reason for doing this, maybe not, but you should at least be looking at it. If you're building excess inventory and there's not a good reason for it, you're probably introducing problems that you don't want.
Exactly, and it's Buddha, it's waste. And
right.
I mean, really what this is this is a pull system. You're trying to get to a pull system where stuff is just needed when it's needed, and whatever stuff, whether it's finished products or parts that go into those finished products, you want it to be ready when you're ready to put it together, and you want it to be finished when it's ready to be sent out to a customer.
And this is what, I stole that little term from Mike Micklewright, is the idea of inventory control for work in process, not for little items, but you're actually doing a pull system on your work in process.
Yeah.
Which I'd run. Maybe everybody else is going, well, duh, but I'd never heard of that. I thought it was pretty cool.
It's interesting. I mean, and we have talked about lean accounting a few times here, and that idea of creating a lot of inventory really is a vestige of a legacy system where non-lean accounting said build it, create the inventory. It's considered to be on the books as potentially a sale, right? But that sale isn't realized until it's actually sold. So all that time, it could be months, stuff could be in inventory. It's not doing anything. It's just wasting space and all the stuff that went into building.
Space that you're paying for, by the way, because you pay for space.
But you also pay for the stuff that went into it. So I mean, make the thing. So it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. So good article by Amy Williams. Go out there, take a read it.
Yep. And this is Amy. Amy is not. We have not had Amy in the.
No. This was just some. Random author that sent us a story. I thought it was an interesting.
A good story. Hopefully we'll get more from Amy coming forward.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Derek. All right, well, earlier in the show, I mentioned risk management in the context of a summit being hosted by research firm Gartner. This is just another example of the fact that risk, it seems, is on everyone's lips these days. Understanding, controlling, and mitigating risk is increasingly linked with improving organizational quality and performance excellence. Of course, in today's interconnected business world, getting a handle on risk within your own organization is, at best, only half the battle. Many of you in our audience work with extremely intricate and complex supply chains, and those suppliers can themselves add a great deal of uncertainty and risk to your processes. Sure. Gaining visibility into your supplier's operations and risk management procedures is the goal, and there are many ways to achieve success. Fortunately, our guest on the show today is an expert on this topic and can help us understand the risks as well as the rewards of better supplier management. So, here with us now to discuss this very topic, we're very happy to welcome Tim Lozier of ETQ back to the show. Tim, thanks for being here.
How are you?
All right, terrific.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Well, we published an article from you yesterday titled Risk Management Outside Your Four Walls. In the piece, you talk about risk and suppliers in our increasingly complex world. So give us a little context. What's changed in the last maybe decade or two that's made supply chain management more challenging, more risky, I guess, than it was in the past?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about where we are in business today, there's a lot more complexity. You look at the product variation, the length of supply chains, and also the globalization of industries, and you start to see a lot of risks that start to crop up from what it was years ago. I'd say some of the big areas that we're seeing is certainly growth. So when you look at the growth of a business or a market segment, the supply chains get longer, they get bigger. There's a lot of variances in the supply chain, and that inhibits a lot of different things like visibility. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the visibility from when a product is being realized to the actual supply chain providing materials becomes an issue. There's a gap in communication. This also leads to a lack of control. So we find that companies are challenged with being able to control what's going on within their supplier organizations and feeding information back and forth. And this all comes as an overreaching risk. There's a lot of different risks that exist out there, from losing your critical skills to loss of intellectual property to ensuring that the quality that you are expecting within your organization is being matched within the supply chain. So all these things are bumping up against each other, and a lot of companies are still struggling to get that communication, create that link. Really move from a pure supply chain operation to more of a supplier network, where suppliers are actually collaborating on the same information within no lag time and no loss of communication.
Tim, you mentioned in your article 3 basic and effective risk assessment tools. Could you just kind of briefly recap those for us and tell us how they help people assess risk?
Sure, and of course I don't want to spoil anything for our webinar next week, but I'll give you a tease. We're going to talk about a lot of different things that you can do to look at risk, and like I said, risk is something that companies are looking at from internal perspective, but also need to look at it from a outside your four walls, whether it's external stakeholders or customers. And there's some tools you can actually use to treat risk in many different ways. We're going to talk about decision trees, which are a very simple way of asking kind of what if this, what if that, and ask the questions to really provide you with the decision. Another way to look at it is from the beginning. When you start looking at your product design and you start building out product and process design, what can you do to do an FMEA or a failure mode effects to not only look at your internal processes and the components that you put together in your product, but also look at the supplier dynamic. How do you look at the different risks and potential failure modes, and how do you communicate that with your supplier to ensure that at the beginning you're really mitigating risk? And then the last component, or one of the last components, is a risk matrix, which is a very simple and well-known concept where you're plotting sometimes three areas on a graph that allow you to look at the severity and likelihood and come up with a score. Now, the interesting thing to note is that what many companies are doing is they're getting to that point where they're identifying their risk, but really that's only half the battle. It's one thing to know that you have a risk. It's a whole other thing to know how to treat that risk and what actions to take to actually truly mitigate what you're doing.
And that's perfect lead-in, because once you've done that assessment, really the question is what next? I mean, in your article, again, we don't want to spoil anything because we are going to have a webinar on this next week, but you do in the article refer to 5 options, decisions, I guess, that help you handle those risks. So maybe you can kind of run through those briefly for us as well.
Sure, and just thinking around that whole concept, risk management is a process just like anything else, and it's actually a process that you can fairly easily insert into your existing operations, your existing processes without any real interruption. But one of the areas is on treatment of risk, and the idea that if you've identified your hazard and you've identified that you have a risk, how do you treat it? And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can, one, accept it. You could say the risk is enough that it's worth the risk, so to speak. Another way is to reduce, which is what a lot of companies do to actually mitigate their risk, put processes and controls in place. But you can also compensate it, so you can seek ways to insure yourself against that risk. You can also transfer risk, and that's something we're talking about with supply chain, is maybe outsource it. Maybe outsource an area or a critical skill or a skill that you can't, that is inherently risky internally, that you can transfer out to mitigate from an outsourced resource. And then obviously if the risk is too great, you could reject it. You can just stop that altogether and look for a better way to do things. And those are just some of the ways that you can go about treatment options. Certainly we'll talk more about it next week, but that's kind of a taste of what you could possibly do.
And Tim, maybe look at the crystal ball a little bit. It is coming at us faster and faster all the time. You're going to get this way for us to manage risk and
eliminate that gap from point A to point B. Point A being I have a problem, and point B is I solve that problem with my supply chain. And it's really around that concept of how do I create a supplier network? How do I take the systems and the tools that I'm using internally and actually build out functionality or processes that allow my suppliers to essentially collaborate in my systems without access to my systems? And so something we're going to be talking about is looking at the gaps that a lot of companies are seeing within their communication and their visibility and control, and looking at how you can automate some of those areas and how you can really use the tools that are out there to build a supplier network to allow you to send information, the right information, and have the suppliers really participate, send information back without going through the clutter in between and communication, and really getting from point A to point B as fast as possible.
Well, all that and a lot more is going to be included in the webinar we're doing together, Tim. We're doing a webinar with you on Thursday, April 28th, titled Risk Management Outside Your Four Walls, Implementing Risk Strategies for the Supply Chain. Again, that is April 28th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. So, Tim, we will see you then, and we'll dive into this a little more deeply next Thursday.
All right, thanks, guys. It's been fun.
Okay.
Thank you, Tim. We'll talk to you then.
All right. Good stuff. All right.
Always.
Well, I like touchy-feely articles.
You do?
I do. I also like the high-tech articles. I think that's kind of the two. I like really techy articles, and I like the really kind of touchy-feely management, hands-on kind of stuff.
So you can't wait for the day when we have emotive robots.
Yes.
Truly emotive robots.
That's the best of everything.
That can
That's right.
hug you.
Robots that can hug you.
Say, I'm sorry you're having a tough day. Can I make you a cup of tea?
That'd be the ultimate for me.
That would be great.
Emotive robots. I love that.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's great.
Well, speaking of that, there was a really good article I thought this week by Michelle LaBrosse. We run her articles pretty much every month. And it really touched a nerve with me. And in her article, it was called How to Align Actions with Intentions. LaBrosse talks about triggers, those events or situations that push us into making choices that aren't necessarily fully conscious or intentional. We just react rather than take action that has some purpose and has some thought behind it. And some of these reactions, you can probably think of a lot of your own, but a couple of them might be lashing out at a coworker or maybe neglecting work that you need to do. And ironically, those behaviors don't make us feel better. Rather, they lead us to feel guilty and frustrated, which in turn sets us up for another trigger and so forth, right? It becomes kind of a vicious circle. And letting off steam rarely makes us feel better, says LaBrosse. And instead, we feel like we aren't in control of our actions or emotions. But she has some tips. And we're going to go through, I think there's 5 tips. We'll go through them here. The first one is identify what triggers you. It's easy to say that we are blindsided by events, but you know what? That is usually not true, particularly in the workplace or even at home. Most likely, there are people or situations that you encounter every day at work or at home that bug you. You aren't blindsided. These exist every day. So be aware of what those triggers are and think ahead. Think ahead of what are you going to do with those triggers. So first of all, you might understand how to avoid those situations. What do you do that normally puts you in a situation where this trigger is going to happen? Well, do you have to walk into that situation? Is there a way to avoid it? And also, if you are going to enter those situations, plan ahead on how you should deal with that triggering event should it happen. Have a plan in mind. Okay, if this person does this, this is how I'm going to respond, rather than just reacting at the spur of the moment, right?
What's interesting is that that's not that different from what Tim just talked about with how you handle risk. Once you know what your risks are, how do you deal with them?
How do you
outsource them? You're going to come up with a plan to deal with it. It's really not that different.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And in particularly in the workplace, those are risks.
Those are risks, exactly right.
Number 2, recognize and accept that you are being triggered. You can't ignore what you feel, right? I mean, you feel what you feel. So accept, if these triggers occur, accept that this is an annoyance. But per step 1, what we just talked about, put into practice the way you control your actions to that trigger. If you're prepared and have a plan, you won't just rashly respond to an event. Number 3, breathe. This every time, take a deep breath. Have you actually ever tried that?
No, I just did, but it's nice.
But it is. It actually works. If the first thing you do is just like, take a breath. This actually works. Deep breaths actually help to calm you so you can focus on making a conscious choice in response to a trigger. I think it works on a couple levels. One is it gives you a pause. It's rather than reacting, it gives you even a couple of seconds just to, okay. And also, there is something cleansing about bringing in fresh air and letting out bad air that really has a physiological effect. Number 4, I think this is actually the most important of the 5. Identify positive intentions of others. This is huge. And I think people are really reluctant, in my opinion, to do this. So the question you're asking, what is motivating the other person to do what they are doing? Is it motivated by something which is actually positive, but they are acting out in a negative way? And I can give you a really good example of this. You might have a coworker who is fanatic about delivering good customer service. I mean, just delivering good customer service is in their bones. You always treat the customer right. This is how you treat customers. This is the way it's supposed to be done. This is a good thing. But maybe something happens and there is a customer service slip, and that person makes a snarky comment, maybe about the customer service department or maybe about a particular customer service rep. Their response, totally wrong, but their motivation is absolutely on the money, right? So you understand that. You understand, okay, bad response, good motivation. Well, that's a good thing to know. What is driving this person? So then you can work with that person on, okay, look, I'm glad that you're passionate about customer service. That is a very positive attitude, but here's the way you should deal with it when you see a problem with customer service. Here's the right way to deal with it. And you deal with it kind of what the root cause is, right? LeBras says this, he's got a good little quote here. Take a minute to acknowledge the other person's positive intention that led to his actions. As the saying goes, we judge ourselves by our intentions, and we judge others by their actions. Yeah, judging others by their intentions opens up a whole new set of possibilities to help you understand and empathize.
Empathize, that's the key thing. Empathy is really important.
Is really key.
Yep.
People typically aren't jerks.
Right.
Not really. They're motivated by something, and their response to something that doesn't go quite the way they think is often not the right response.
Right.
But what's behind it very often is the right thing. So it's important to understand what that intention is. Okay, number 5, find a productive way to move forward. We can't control triggering events. We can only control how we respond to them. What is the best way forward in a situation? Not what you might feel like doing in the moment, what your gut response is, but what makes sense given what you would like to see happen. Good article by Michelle LeBras. I mean, it really kind of makes you step back and just go, okay, because we encounter these things all the time, right? Stuff is always happening at home and in the workplace. I think if you take a moment to think about how do I want to respond, and also how do I deal with this person, understanding that their motivations are probably okay.
Yeah.
And they're just not dealing with it right? How do you deal with that?
Exactly. You know what I like about Michelle is that her professional discipline is that of a project manager.
Project manager, right. So she has to deal with people.
She has to deal with people, and she brings in this understanding of, okay, well, there's technical ways to get things done, but nothing is done without people, and you need to be able to, we use the term manage people, but you need to work with people. You need to understand motivations, have empathy, and you need to get through some of the interpersonal things that are hey folks, they're inevitable. I mean, inevitably you're in a group, you're working together, you're all passionate about a project. There's going to be conflict. I mean, and you want conflict. You want conflict because from the conflict will come the things that people are most passionate about, and it'll move the project forward. So Michelle understands these things at a real DNA root level, so it's good to have her perspective on that too.
Yep, good stuff.
Great stuff. All right. Well, we're going to close the show this week for you with our tweet of the week, and this one I think, Dirk, is both practical and delicious.
Oh, I like delicious.
Yes.
It's like an emotive robot?
Almost. Very similar. It comes to us from Frenetics Strategic Advisors, who tweet, "There's more to the logistics of shipping chocolate than you may think." You see, as I mentioned right there, this one, it combines the practicality of logistics with the sheer deliciosity of mankind's greatest food invention, chocolate. Right? Am I wrong?
Right. No.
I don't think I'm wrong on that.
You're dead on it.
It's amazing. So anyway, for more great tweets like that, if you want useful and scrumptious tweets about performance excellence, lean, management quality, much more, you can always find us on Twitter at Quality Digest.
That's right. Okay. Well, that is the end of today's show. Just remember, as we were talking to Tim Lozier, we do have a webinar coming up next Thursday, Risk Management Outside Your Four Walls, Implementing Risk Strategies for the Supply Chain, and that's April 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, with Mike Richmond here. Mike's going to be the host, and Tim Lozier, of course, presenting all the smarts. So keep an eye on your email inbox for your invitation and register now if you haven't already registered.
Should be a good one. Tim always does a great presentation.
Tim does really good.
Yeah, so check that one out. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Tim Lozier, for being with us on the show today. You guys all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for a week of QDD, and next Friday for our special 5th anniversary episode of Quality Digest Live. So make sure you come back and join us.
We've been exciting you for 5 years.
5 years. All right, so come back and join us for that. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you then.
So long.
Bye.
fire.